Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 7 running back rankings for the 2020 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be starting off with some news around the National Football League, a couple players, a couple different places, a little bit of the Monday Night Football review, talking about all that kind of jazz. If there's any other waiver wire additions we have to add on to yesterday's video. If you haven't checked out yesterday's waiver wire video, go ahead and check that out. Outside of that, we'll talk about the running back matchups going into Week 7, who has the most advantageous or difficult matchups at the position, which defenses are giving up the most points to opposing running backs thus far this season in a half PPR scoring format. Then after that, of course, we'll talk about my half PPR running back rankings for Week 7. Again, for those of you who are looking for specific players, you can go down into the description of the video and find the timestamps down there. Outside of that, make sure, if you have not yet already, subscribe to the channel. We're almost at 31,000. I cannot thank you guys enough for your incredible support. So again, we're going to be making 2020 fantasy football content here on the daily. So if you have not yet already, click that subscribe button, join the community. Again, make sure you click the like button down below. It really does help us out a lot. Leave a comment if you've got anything that pertains to fantasy football. You need someone else to answer your question. There's guys down there. There's a lot of very experienced fantasy football players down there that'll be happy to answer your questions, check out your trades, all that kind of stuff. But I'll be down there. I'll check out a couple of them. Either way, as of right now, let's get into it, shall we? Monday Night Football review. Wasn't really surprised by the results. The fact that the Cardinals blew out the Dallas Cowboys, that was just a culmination of a lot of turnovers by the Dallas Cowboys. Some of them, maybe it was a penalty. Drake Kirkpatrick's interception seemed like a little bit of illegal contact. But regardless, Zeke putting the ball on the ground twice. Andy Dalton throwing an interception. The offense not looking like they're meshing as of right now. Kyler Murray just being able to torch with his legs. Seemed like a one-sided affair, of course. The fact that DeAndre Hopkins caught the ball only twice yesterday, a little bit of a surprise. Christian Kirk caught the ball twice yesterday, but had 2 touchdowns in those 2 receptions. Either way, it was a one-sided affair. A rare sighting from Kenyan Drake. Nice to see you. Welcome. If you can, guys, try to potentially sell high because I don't know if you'll see another one of those 160-yard, 2-touchdown games from him anytime soon. But there's always a potential. I mean, he did 160 yards and 2 touchdowns last year, Week 16 against the Seattle Seahawks, and they play the Seahawks this week. So just throwing it out there. Outside of that, the game prior that started at 2 p.m. PST, the Kansas City Chiefs versus the Buffalo Bills. As soon as Josh Allen came out and he started 1 for 5 passing, I knew the game was over. Then it was, the Clyde Edwards show where he was just running the rock 26 times on the ground, was dominating. What was it? He was averaging over 7 yards per carry at some time. I mean, he was imposing his will, to say the very least. Even after losing Kelechi Osemele, their left guard, they were still pounding the rock. I think the record that they broke was the most rushing yards in an Andy Reid offense in the history of Andy Reid's career as a head coach. So that's pretty incredible. But it's also a way of telling everybody, hey, Clyde Edwards is our starting running back. We've only just signed Le'Veon Bell to be another Swiss Army knife in this offense. Don't forget who the starter is in this offense. So again, that's a great reminder. You could also sell a high on him potentially as well. Outside of that, there wasn't anybody else in this offense that I was looking at excited about. Maybe Cole Beasley, because John Brown doesn't seem to be a part of this offense, for the last couple of weeks, whether he's injured or just a ghost on the field. So Cole Beasley seems to be the guy that I'm sure is probably already owned in PPR formats, half PPR formats, because he's such a consistent player on a weekly basis, but wanted to throw that out there going into Week 7. Outside of that, another piece of information I wanted to cover, Tua Tagovailoa, the early first-round pick for the Miami Dolphins, number 3 overall, has been named the starter for the Dolphins. So Ryan Fitzmagic, who I talked about yesterday on my waiver wire episode, saying, hey, he's probably going to, be the starter going forward. He probably won't get replaced. Well, the next morning he gets replaced. So for those of you who are looking for a quarterback, I don't know if this is a bad idea or not, but I'm assuming they have enough confidence in him because he's either been torching, defenses at practice, or they're just ready to go. Like they don't care about making the playoffs. They want to start the future, and this is the way to go about it. So either way, could be exciting, could be a great fantasy option, could end up giving more value to other receivers like Preston Williams on a consistent basis. Maybe Mike Gesicki wants to catch a touchdown. We'll see how this offense looks with Tua, but it's exciting to have a little bit of a quarterback switch. If you're in need of one, you can maybe go pick him up for free this upcoming week on waivers. Okay. Outside of that, let's start talking about some running backs going into Week 7 of the 2020 fantasy football season, starting off with some running back matchups. We have ourselves the teams that are giving up the most points to opposing running backs in a half PPR scoring format as of thus far this season on average. Now, as of right now, the Las Vegas Raiders are giving up 30.12 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs on a weekly basis. Now, 100 yards on average, 1.4 rushing yards on average. If I'm not mistaken, the Las Vegas Raiders have given up 8 touchdowns to opposing running backs, whether it's on the ground or through the air. So they've definitely struggled. Of course, they get torched through the air. 7 receptions on average, 66 receiving yards on average. That's not great. And they get to take on Ronald Jones, who's been on fire. So that's always nice. The Carolina Panthers, they have not been playing well against opposing running backs. Of course, they've been dealing with a lot of injuries in terms of their front seven. On top of the fact that they have to take on Alvin Kamara and Latavius Murray this week. That's going to be a little tough for them because that 2 combination, especially coming off bye, should be the nice 1-2 punch to kind of break open the doors and really do some damage that David Montgomery was not able to this past week. The Green Bay Packers, they were in this top 3 last week, and Ronald Jones continued to expose that front seven for not being one of the better defenses in the National Football League in terms of stopping the run. So again, there is a possibility that if Green Bay plays against David Johnson, who's getting more and more carries every single week, he could potentially take advantage of it, but we'll keep an eye on him. The Detroit Lions, of course, a defense that is not great. Even though James Robinson wasn't able to produce as well, I still think that, Todd Gurley could have himself a pretty good week this week. The New York Jets take on the Buffalo Bills. Again, the Buffalo Bills aren't running the ball very much as of late, and Devin Singletary isn't being given many opportunities. And even the last time that they played against the Jets, it was more of an all-passing game, and Devin Singletary really played like the 5th option in terms of that offense and opportunity. Outside of that, Houston, of course, they have to play against the Green Bay Packers. They've been giving up a lot of points. We'll talk about that in just a bit. But those are the more advantageous matchups that I definitely want to be starting my running backs against this week if I have the opportunity to do so. With that being said, some of the tougher matchups are on screen now. Of course, the Denver Broncos really did stop Cam Newton and this rushing attack of the New England Patriots from producing it all. Now, sure, Cam Newton was fine on the ground. He's always going to be because, defenses, as much as they'd like to stop him, he is just a tank. And he got his work on the ground. He was able to score a rushing touchdown, get his yardage on the ground. But I couldn't say that about everybody else. Damian Harris, Rex Burkhead, James White, they were not capable enough on the ground. Now, that being said, this upcoming week, Denver gets to take on Kansas City. Is Clyde Edwards-Helaire and the combination of him and Le'Veon Bell going to be a good enough combo to put up points against this team? I think they'll be just fine. So regardless, we play those kind of players. The 49ers, again, they've been pretty stout against the run. Pittsburgh Steelers, of course, we know playing Derrick Henry. That's going to be an exciting matchup. With Taylor Lewan going down for the rest of the season with an ACL injury, that's going to be an interesting thing to see how they can adjust accordingly. I know they have a lot of depth at offensive tackle, but we'll see how that goes. Of course, the Indianapolis Colts, New England Patriots, Baltimore Ravens, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. These are the defenses that every week I talk about that I'm afraid of playing my running backs against. So shouldn't be a surprise that they're on the list here. The only team that's really missing that I'm always afraid of in terms of, playing my running backs against is the New Orleans Saints. But again, typically these are the teams that I'm afraid of, and I always mention on a weekly basis. So now that we've kind of covered that, we can go ahead and we can move into our top 36 running back rankings in a half PPR scoring format. Again, if you haven't yet already and you'd like to and you can help me out a bit, go down below, click that like button already. It really does make a difference, helps out the channel a lot. If we can get past 1,000 likes, 2,000 likes, 3,000 likes, that'd be incredible. So I really do appreciate it, guys. Okay, so let's start talking about my top 36 running back rankings for this week. Starting off with my number 1, Alvin Kamara. Shouldn't be a surprise. He's the number 1 running back by a pretty significant margin right now. If he was a wide receiver, he'd have the 6th most receptions as a wide receiver in the National Football League right now. Of course, he leads all running backs in receptions. Not really a surprise. He leads all running backs in fantasy points by 21 points above the next best running back. So he's got a pretty significant margin on anybody else, and he's only played 5 games. So let's not, sugarcoat this any more than we have to. He's got a really advantageous matchup. He's one of the best running backs in the National Football League. Playing against Carolina, again, thus far this season, Carolina, even though on the ground at times they can be better, they've got holes, and you could definitely expose them with a good offensive line like New Orleans Saints have. Earlier this season, Austin Eckler had 11 targets, 11 receptions in a game. And when I looked at all the reception counts for teams against Carolina, every single starting running back against Carolina this season has at least caught the ball 4 times. Just imagine what Alvin Kamara is going to be capable of accomplishing against that defense. I'm really excited about the matchup and Alvin Kamara's potential. We move on to Aaron Jones. Of course, Aaron Jones luckily scored a touchdown this last week against Tampa Bay. Again, I was really worried about the matchup because, again, Tampa Bay Buccaneers are one of the best. But 10 rushes for 15 yards wasn't the greatest numbers for Aaron Jones. He fell into the end zone, got a touchdown. 3 catches for 26 yards, got himself over 10 fantasy points. Beautiful. We love to see it. So the question now, kind of remains, what can we expect against Houston? It's going to be, honestly, one of the best games that Aaron Jones possibly has. Now, Aaron Jones is on that pace for keeping up with his touchdown count of last season. And I think this upcoming week, if we see a 2-touchdown game, maybe 3-touchdown game with 100 rushing yards, I'm not going to be surprised. Looking at the rushing counts that Houston's given up in the last couple of weeks against opposing running backs, 138, 109, 130, and 212, of course, Derrick Henry this past week. But they've just been getting gashed by opposing running backs. Aaron Jones, this offense, they're pissed off. They got embarrassed against Tampa Bay. I think they're ready to, kind of flip the script, get back up to their ways of winning. We have ourselves Kareem Hunt at number 3. Kareem Hunt, again, played against another tough matchup. Played against the Pittsburgh Steelers. 13 rushes for 40 yards. Didn't get any touchdowns. That was unfortunate. Didn't even get that much work in the passing game, but that wasn't a surprise. Again, Pittsburgh is unstoppable on the ground. In terms of what they have up front, a lot of people talk about TJ Watt or Bud Dupree, but like Stephon Tuitt is a rock in the middle of that defense. He does not move. Hayward is another one of these rocks that they're all pro players that a lot of people just kind of forget about. Again, shouldn't be surprised at how difficult it was for Cleveland to score, but this upcoming week they play against Cincinnati. The last time we saw the Cleveland Browns playing against Cincinnati, week 2, Thursday Night Football, it was just all run all day. I mean, Kareem Hunt had 20 points. Nick Chubb had 20 points. They were able to impose their will. If I'm not mistaken, Kareem Hunt was averaging over 7 yards per carry in that contest, with just running over defenders and finding gaps in that defense. So again, I think that's something that we can easily, once again, find with Kareem Hunt this week. Again, D'Ernest Johnson, Dontrell Hilliard, these are not guys that are going to be taking touches away from him. I think it's just a matter of what are we going to see and how much opportunity will Kareem Hunt get. I think there's going to be a lot. With Baker a little bit banged up, this offense kind of just trying to get back to their winning ways. I think Kareem Hunt could definitely just pound the rock 25 times for 100 yards and a touchdown this week. Moving on to Zeke, of course, you put the ball on the ground twice. A lot of people are pointing at his fumbles and saying, oh, that's the reason why he's been so bad at fantasy. It's not the case. He was actually decent last night. He was pretty much averaging 5 yards per carry until late in the game on the ground. He also had another one of these games where he's getting an incredible amount of receptions, 11 targets, 8 receptions for 31 yards. Of course, in a half PPR scoring format, it's not as valuable. 4 points compared to 8 points. I mean, it's a pretty big swing there. But again, as of right now, as long as he's getting work in the passing game, eventually this offense will figure it out. Playing against Washington this upcoming week, I'm not really too afraid of it. I think Ezekiel Elliott is still another one of these guys that you start every week, regardless of the matchup, regardless of how they're playing. You're going to ride it out with him. I'm excited about the potential of him, getting back and finding themselves in this offense. They got to run the ball and establish the run a little bit earlier. Of course, they got down super early. I think it was 21-3 at halftime. So again, if they can go ahead and at least compete with Washington, which I think they should be able to do, and stay within arm's reach of them, then Zeke is going to be more of a presence in the second half, especially on the ground. Again, their offensive line's been banged up. Zach Martin got hurt early, and again, they've been struggling heavily in terms of being able to protect Dalton and open up holes for Zeke. It's been tough for that offense for sure. Moving on, Derrick Henry. Again, even though it's a tough matchup, what are we to do? We're playing Derrick Henry regardless. I mean, you're not going to sit a guy that just had 212 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, 52 receiving yards. I mean, he had 5 targets. I mean, when does Derrick Henry ever have 5 targets, right? Regardless of the matchup, whether he plays against Pittsburgh or not, Derrick Henry, I think, has like 120 overall rushing attempts thus far this season. He's just, he is the offense. And whether or not you're excited about the potential of his overall performance on the ground, you got to remember he's the goal line back. He can get it done regardless of the defense. I've seen him at times struggle in these kind of matchups, but if they give him the ball 30 times on the ground, I'm not going to be surprised because he'll eventually break one of these. That's just the kind of player he is. But again, you're starting Mr. Derrick Henry regardless because dropping 40 points and then following week getting 10 points, so be it. I'm still going to start him because I like his upside. Ronald Jones is my number 6. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 3 consecutive weeks with Ronald Jones have had 100+ rushing yards. Ronald Jones has been incredible on the ground. I knew he was going to score a touchdown this past week against Green Bay because, again, Green Bay is not great against stopping the run. But again, Ronald Jones has really established himself as the starting running back of this team. With Leonard Fournette missing the last 3 games, it is a foregone conclusion in my eyes that Ronald Jones is the go-to in this offense. Like we mentioned earlier when we were talking about matchups of the running back position, the Las Vegas Raiders have given up 8 touchdowns to opposing running backs thus far this season. The last couple contests against running backs, 96 yards, 79 yards, and 117 yards on the ground. So again, they've got some holes that they need to fill. Hopefully they've been preparing for that this in the bye week that they just had. But if they're not able to, Ronald Jones is going to be able to take advantage of it. That offensive line in Tampa Bay really been playing well as of late. James Conner is my number 7. So again, James Conner, speaking of players that have had 100-yard games, he's had already 3 100-yard rushing games in the 4 games that he's played fully in. So again, he's been a very consistent part of this offense. 20 rushing attempts for 101 rushing yards against Cleveland, which was pretty stout defense prior to Sunday's game against Pittsburgh. Of course, had himself a rushing touchdown. Has been a consistent force in this offense. Plays against Tennessee. Again, Tennessee's not a great defense. They proved that. I mean, if Houston can go in and just do whatever they want, whether it's on the ground or through the air, for 4 straight quarters, even into, of course, overtime, they never had an opportunity, but for 4 straight quarters all the way to the end, if you can do that to Tennessee's defense, then I think, of course, Pittsburgh will be able to do so. This is a matchup in which James Conner should be utilized a lot. The way it looks, they're going to be running the ball, so James Conner should be a great part of this offense. Moving on, we have ourselves Chris Carson at number 8, coming off of the bye week. So here's the thing about Chris Carson. When we look at what his opportunity has been this season in comparison to other running backs, it's pretty surprising. He has, the statistic is not even a joke. Chris Carson has 62 rushing attempts thus far this season. I think Derrick Henry has 123. So Derrick Henry has twice as many rushing attempts as Chris Carson, but Chris Carson's only a couple slots behind him in terms of overall fantasy production. He's the number 7 overall back right now. But the really big difference for Chris Carson is his work in the passing game. I mean, the fact that he has 3 receiving touchdowns this season, all 3 of those coming within the first 2 games of the season, and then eventually in the last couple games has gotten more and more established on the ground. That has been the biggest difference maker. So now when you go against Arizona, and I think, okay, Arizona Cardinals, they just played against Dallas, and Zeke was able to get 8 total receptions on 8 total receptions on 11 targets. I think to myself, well, maybe Chris Carson, if the ground game isn't able to, kind of find itself, maybe he's going to get work through the air and find himself even more value there. That's why Chris Carson, again, he's 15 plus points in fantasy, especially being associated with this kind of offense. It just seems like automatic points to me. And that's why I have him ranked up here against Arizona, because again, he's getting the ample amount of touches. He's getting the goal line work, and there really isn't anybody there to impede him from doing both those things, which is the most valuable thing for a running back in fantasy: goal line work and opportunity. We move on to Mike Davis. So even though Mike Davis was sort of relevant in fantasy this past week, 10 points in comparison to his natural average of 20 points-ish. It was a little bit of a disappointment, but a lot of running backs disappointed this past week. Just go look at the entire list of week 6 performances of the running back position. I mean, we saw 5 guys have great weeks. Everybody else was a 10-point play. Mike Davis still had 18 rushing attempts, 52 receiving yards, a total of 2 catches on 3 targets. Again, that was the biggest difference maker. Typically, we see Mike Davis catching the ball 8 times a game. Only catching the ball twice for 3 yards. It's a pretty big surprise in my eyes. So again, playing against New Orleans this week, that's a tough matchup. But again, if in fact Mike Davis is to find himself in the end zone due to a goal line opportunity, because Teddy Bridgewater in this passing offense is able to move the ball down the field, which they should be able to, of course, then that'll be great. Of course, you want to see him get more in the passing game in a half or full PPR format, and I expect him to do so. Again, he's not one of these backs that, as long as he's playing because Christian McCaffrey's out, he'll have value. James Robinson's my number 10. Again, James Robinson, wasn't incredibly impressive, especially into a very advantageous matchup against Detroit. 12 carries for 29 yards, but at least had himself, some work in the passing game. That work that he had late in the passing game, the garbage time receiving touchdown, I love to see it. 4 catches on 4 targets, 24 receiving yards, the receiving touchdown. That makes your week. And that is what continues to keep James Robinson in this top 12 conversation, because as long as you're getting the work, whether it's on the ground or through the air, as long as you're getting consistent opportunity, you love to see it. So again, James Robinson, even though it didn't go his way for majority of the game on the ground, he was still able to get it done through the air. He's playing against the Los Angeles Chargers this week again. I think the Chargers at times have been decent on the ground, especially last week, in week 5 against the New Orleans Saints. They were pretty good at bottling up Latavius Murray and Alvin Kamara, but at times they've also just gotten the doors blown off of them and given up 100+ yards like a Ronald Jones. So I think that there's probably an in-between there that we find with James Robinson. He's got the touchdown upside, and as long as this offense keeps moving the ball, I think James Robinson's got a lot of potential. Moving on to our next player, we have ourselves Joe Mixon at number 11. So here's the thing about Joe Mixon. He had a pretty good first quarter. along with all the other Cincinnati Bengals. Unfortunately, Joe Burrow and Giovanni Bernard took touchdowns from him on the goal line. It's kind of unfortunate, but Joe Mixon still got himself 18 total rushing attempts, 54 rushing yards, a rushing touchdown, 2 catches for 15 yards. Left the game early with a foot injury, then came back. Was fine. Joe Mixon had himself a decent fantasy game in comparison to the rest of the field this past week in week 6. That being said, this upcoming week they take on the Cleveland Browns. What I love to see with Joe Mixon is the consistency of touches. In the last 3 weeks, he has had a total of 80 touches for this team. That in itself is just, I cannot argue against it. If you're going to touch the ball 30 times, and 20 times in 3 weeks, you're going to score points. And whether you do or not, it does not matter to me, because I know that I trust him as a talent, and as long as he's getting the opportunity, then I'm just going to let him be. So as of right now, Joe Mixon is another one of these guys that as long as he's getting touches, which it looks like Zach Taylor finally woke up after that little bit of a issue earlier in the season, they're just going to keep feeding the ball to him, and he's going to score. He's going to score points, and I trust Joe Mixon going forward. Moving on to number 12, we have ourselves Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Now, the reason why I have Clyde at number 12 in comparison to a little bit higher, I know he had an incredible game. I mean, I'll repeat the stats for you guys. 26 carries for 161 rushing yards, 4 catches for 8 yards. Sure, the yardage doesn't matter in the receiving game if, in fact, you're getting 30 touches regardless. Just like we talked about Joe Mixon. Getting touches is the greatest thing in fantasy. Opportunity will always lead to success, but with Le'Veon Bell coming back, can those receptions or a couple of those rushing attempts disappear, especially against a pretty, stout run-stopping defense like the Denver Broncos currently have? I still think that Clyde Edwards-Helaire is going to find himself success. I still think that Le'Veon Bell's presence won't be too overbearing to the extent where it's going to eliminate too much of Clyde Edwards' value, but Clyde Edwards, if he goes back to being a 10 rushing attempt, 3 catch kind of guy, then of course his value is going to diminish heavily. He did have a touchdown called back, so he could have even had a bigger game yesterday. But that being said, I still like his potential against the Denver Broncos. I still think that Le'Veon Bell is going to have to work into this offense slowly but surely. We'll get there. But as of right now, Clyde Edwards just seems like an automatic play in my eyes. Josh Jacobs at number 13. Again, he plays Tampa Bay. That is one of the toughest things a running back can do this season. We're going to have to hope for a touchdown, because Tampa Bay, where they've struggled the most this season, is against running backs in the passing game. And I don't see Josh Jacobs as a threat there. I know he's gotten a lot of receptions already this season in comparison to last year. They've gotten him more and more involved there, but there's still always the presence of Devontae Booker, Theo Riddick, Jalen Richard coming in and taking receptions and or total rushing attempts from him. So that in itself has been difficult for a Josh Jacobs owner to watch and try to see what exactly could we go and find from this. But again, this is a tough matchup. I don't have anybody better than Josh Jacobs. He's one of my better running backs. I'm going to start him regardless. So even though it's a tough matchup, we're going to have to ride with him. I just got to hope for the touchdown upside in this offense. We have ourselves Todd Gurley at number 14 again. This past week was a little bit of a flip of the script for Dirk Cutter in that Atlanta Falcons offense. Of course, they cleared house, and they were just a pass-hungry team. They just wanted to feed the ball to Julio, Calvin Ridley, Hayden Hurst, showed up. Russell Gage showed up. Matt Ryan, of course, had himself one of the best games of his season. But of course, Todd Gurley did suffer because of it. He still had 20 rushing attempts, but they were all rushing attempts late in the game when they were up so many points that they could just, the defense is keying in. They want to run the ball. They want to kill the clock. Let's just stuff Todd Gurley by run committing. So it was a little bit unfortunate for him in this scenario, but at least Todd Gurley, once again, getting more work in the passing game. That is something nice to see. This upcoming week, they take on the Detroit Lions. So again, a really exciting matchup. The potential is there for Todd Gurley. So I think there's always a good opportunity here for him to step up to the task at hand and deliver a great fantasy performance. We have ourselves Darrell Henderson as my number 15. Darrell Henderson had many opportunities this past week to score touchdowns, but the Rams offense fell apart. When Jared Goff comes out and starts 1 for 5 passing, 1 for 6 passing, I know the game's over. As a Rams fan, I know this, okay? So, I've already watched too much Jared Goff to think otherwise. But the fact that the running game was so effective for majority of that game, I think Darrell Henderson was averaging 6 yards per carry. We didn't see a single lick of Cam Akers in the entire first half of the game, or even in the second half, even though he got a couple opportunities. I still think that Darrell Henderson is being underutilized in this offense. They've got to get him more involved in the passing game. Chicago's defense isn't the greatest against stopping the run this year. 93 yards, 80 yards, 68 yards, 106 yards, and 52 yards in the last couple of matchups against opposing running backs. So again, they're not completely impervious to giving up some yardage on the ground. Even though they are one of the more elite defenses in the National Football League, I think that's through the air. So hopefully they'll key in, continue to give carries to Darrell Henderson and let him just run away with the game. We move on to number 16. We have ourselves David Johnson here. So David Johnson plays against the Green Bay Packers. I mentioned it before. Green Bay does not have one of the best run-stopping defense. And the more and more opportunities David Johnson is getting within this offense, the more and more success he's finding. Again, the last 2 weeks, he's continued to find himself with the most touches thus far this season with the Houston Texans. Had 20 touches, 19 on the ground, 1 through the air. So again, as long as he keeps getting this continuous opportunity, and Deshaun Watson's playing as well as he did on Sunday with the receiving core, of course, of Will Fuller, Brandon Cooks, and Darren Fells, spreading out the opposing defenses, I think there's always an opportunity for David Johnson to fall in the end zone and have himself a pretty good game on the ground this upcoming week against Green Bay. Kenyan Drake, 17. So I think this is the perfect time to sell high on him. I will say that, but there's always a potential that Kenyan Drake finds some momentum here and the team continues to rely upon it. I mean, look, Kenyan Drake prior to this past week had the 6th most rushing attempts amongst all running backs, throughout the season. The fact that he went ahead and had himself another big game of 20 rushing attempts just continues to add upon that pile. So the big run late in the game, 69-yard touchdown, sure, that was a pretty big difference maker, but it doesn't take away from the fact that he's still a starting running back in the National Football League that had himself a pretty good week prior to even that big play. So again, playing against Seattle last year, late in the season, week 16, had himself a huge game, 24 rushing attempts, $166 and 2 touchdowns, similar to exactly what he did to Dallas just this past week. So there's always a potential that Kenyan Drake has himself another big week, but if you'd like to sell him, you can try to. I'm just thinking that he honestly could have another big week here. We're moving on. We have ourselves Justin Jackson at number 18. I think as a Chargers fan, any LA sports fan, Dodgers, baby, we're going to the World Series. The Lakers, we just won the NBA championship, so we're looking good. Either way, I think Justin Jackson, as of right now, playing against Jacksonville, it just seems like an automatic play in my eyes. I mean, Jacksonville in the last couple of weeks, 116 on the ground, 96, 151, 66, and 84. These are huge numbers to opposing running backs that they've been giving up. Of course, DeAndre Swift and Adrian Peterson, both extremely reliable this past week. So I think regardless of Joshua Kelley being in his backfield, Justin Jackson's still going to get touches. He had 20 touches against New Orleans this past week, in week 5. So again, the viability's there, the matchup's there, the opportunity's there. I'm going to roll with Justin Jackson as my number 18 this week. Our number 19 for this upcoming week is Jerrick McKinnon. Now, yesterday when I talked about JaMycal Hasty of the 49ers and the situation with Raheem Mostert, I wasn't obviously unaware of what the injury in the MRI was because it hadn't happened by the time I recorded yesterday's video. Now that we have more information, it's looking like Raheem Mostert, unfortunately, once again re-injured himself, has himself a high ankle sprain, is probably going to go to the IR. Boom. Jerrick McKinnon becomes another, viable running back just like that. Let's not forget, I know Jerrick McKinnon in the last 2 weeks has been below, average. He's been, he's been terrible, okay? 1.5 points, 3.8 points, that's not going to cut it. But in the first 4 weeks of the season, he scored a touchdown in every single game. He was averaging 15 fantasy points per game in the first 4 weeks, and we're getting back to that. The New England Patriots, not one of the better defenses. Sure, they could, stop running backs from scoring here and there, but in terms of yardage, I mean, Phillip Lindsay came off an injury, 101 rushing yards. In the last couple weeks prior to that, they've given up 72 yards to Chris Carson. They gave up 71 to another running back, 64 to another running back. So the opportunity is going to be there. I'm hoping that this offense just wants to continue to run the ball as much as they have. And I think Jerrick McKinnon could have some more value going forward in said offense. So we move on. We have ourselves one of the hidden gems that really exploded this past week, DeAndre Swift. I knew it was just a matter of time. I mean, you cannot draft one of these running backs and not give him opportunity. And not only did he take the opportunity by the horns and just run away with it, he really has established himself as a guy that should be getting more touches in this offense and potentially could eventually make Adrian Peterson just disappear. So having the ball 14 times on the ground for $116, 2 rushing touchdowns, 3 catches out of the backfield. These are all incredible numbers. The fact they play against Atlanta, I know Alexander Mattison was the biggest disappointment of week 6, but Alexander Mattison had to deal with the fact that Kirk Cousins was throwing the ball to the other team for a majority of the first half. So that's an unfortunate scenario, and the fact that Alexander Mattison just wasn't given an opportunity to run the ball in the second half, it happens. But if in fact this offense can figure it out early, not get behind against the Atlanta Falcons, DeAndre Swift could be a huge part against that defense. We move on to David Montgomery. Again, David Montgomery had himself a pretty decent week this past week. Wasn't able to find himself in the end zone or have big plays. Again, on the ground is getting consistent work. Through the air is pretty much their receiving back with Tariq Cohen gone. 4 catches this past week for 39 yards, 19 total rushing attempts for 58. That's great. Playing against the Rams, again, I think the Rams are one of these defenses that are either show up or don't completely. And I think at times they've struggled against the Chicago Bears. There's a potential that David Montgomery could find himself a pretty good value, but I'm thinking, David Montgomery is probably a 10-point play every week, and that's, his value and his potential floor and ceiling. And that's why he sits here at 21, because I'm just a little worried about his upside, especially considering his yard per carry average has been 3.0 or lower in the last couple of weeks, which is, it's not going to do it. Melvin Gordon is my number 22. So Melvin Gordon missed this past week with illness. I think it was strep throat or something of that extent. Of course, Phillip Lindsay, filled in his starting role and played pretty well. So the question is, where exactly are we going to see this offense kind of go from here? Are we going to see a 60-40 split, 50-50 split? I'm not 100% certain, but Melvin Gordon, of course, has got a lot of talent, has proven thus far this season that he is a 15-point running back every single week. He has the potential of it, regardless of the matchup, to put up great amount of points. He's already done that this year, so hopefully he'll continue to do that. But I think against Kansas City, it's going to be a matter of, can you keep the ball away from Patrick Mahomes? Buffalo was not able to do that, but the week prior, Las Vegas was. So if you can go ahead and get your running backs, whether it's Melvin Gordon, Phillip Lindsay, Royce Freeman, get them running the ball early and often and consistently keeping the ball out of Patrick Mahomes' hands, you have a chance to win that game and finding more value with Gordon. Antonio Gibson's my number 23. So Antonio Gibson's got the issue of J.D. McKissic in his back pocket, really siphoning value. This upcoming week, they take on the Dallas Cowboys. I think Dallas, in itself, just what we saw yesterday, their defense can't stop a soul. Regardless of what they try to do, they just can't stop anybody. And I think even Washington's going to have advantage against that defense. Hopefully, Antonio Gibson gets a little bit more involved on the ground, gets himself back into the end zone. I still think that the fact that he's getting as much work as he has through the air is fantastic, especially in a half or full PPR format, because eventually he'll break out one of these catches for a bigger play. It's just a matter of time. But again, the fact that he'll get more rushing attempts this week is an exciting prospect for him. Devin Singletary at 24. I know it's a really advantageous matchup. Playing against the New York Jets for anybody should be an automatic play. I just don't trust the Buffalo Bills offense. Devin Singletary in the last 2 weeks has been a no-show. TJ Yeldon was out yesterday, even though he had a good week on Tuesday. Zach Moss came back to no opportunities at all. It just doesn't seem like an offense that's going to run the ball. And to be honest, playing against the Jets, look back at week 1. They threw the ball for 400 yards, and that's all they did. They did not want to run the ball at all, and that's probably what they'll do once again this week. So Devin Singletary beginning to fade away slowly throughout the season. James White's my number 25. Again, the fact that James White is getting more work in the passing game, you love to see it. 8 catches for 65 yards, especially because this offensive line is falling apart. It's going to become harder and harder for them to run the ball, especially against San Francisco this upcoming week. So I think James White could be a guy that needs to be utilized for majority of that second half in order to keep up with the 49ers. I think he's a pretty good option at number 25. 26, Boston Scott, a guy that you could potentially pick up later tonight on waivers. The reason I mentioned Boston Scott is because, when you fill in for Miles Sanders, you're probably going to get 10 touches minimum. And 10 touches against the New York Giants could be a pretty good day. Honestly, if you get a goal line touch here and there, and on Thursday Night Football, you're able to at least break out a couple catches and make some plays in the receiving game, then sure, Boston Scott will be great. But when I look at the receiving game of the Philadelphia Eagles, they have not targeted receivers as much as they did late last season when they didn't have receivers. They've really gone after funnel targeting Travis Fulgham and Greg Ward as much as they possibly can to keep the ball out of Carson Wentz's hands. I think if Carson Wentz checks the ball down a little bit more, he probably will be taking less hits than he usually does. But again, I just don't see Boston Scott being any more upside than what he currently is sitting at with 26. We kind of got screwed over by him in week 1 against Washington, and I'm thinking this upcoming week against the New York Giants could be much of the same, possibly. We move on to J.D. McKissic at number 27. McKissic is getting a lot of touches. If you're going to get 10 plus touches, regardless, just like I just mentioned with Boston Scott, you're going to have value. Hopefully they're through the air, of course, because the PPR value. But J.D. McKissic's been doing it on a weekly basis, and he's not slowing down. The fact that he had 8 total rushing attempts for 41 yards, 6 catches on 6 targets for 43 yards, you're going to have value every single week. Playing against the Dallas Cowboys, just a really easy matchup, and it's something that I'm not going to complain about, and I think you could easily start both him and Antonio Gibson every single week and find value from both of them because, again, all those receptions are making a pretty big difference. Moving on to number 28, we have ourselves Adrian Peterson. Even though DeAndre Swift had a huge game, I don't think that Adrian Peterson is yet going to disappear. I mean, this is back-to-back weeks of 10-plus touches on the ground and a rushing touchdown. Again, playing against Jacksonville this past week, 15 rushes for 40 yards and a touchdown, got himself 1 catch for 18 yards. He's still going to be a viable piece of this offense. Playing against Atlanta, he probably might even just still start this game. Again, I think there's still going to be a little bit of a rotation in that backfield. We still saw a little bit of sprinkles of Kerryon Johnson. So I don't think Adrian Peterson's all done yet, but I still think, DeAndre Swift should potentially get more touches like he did this last week going forward. But again, Adrian Peterson in a very advantageous matchup in my eyes should be a good play. Joshua Kelley, my number 29. Again, Justin Jackson, as of right now, again, is probably the starting running back for this team, but they're going to rotate these running backs. They're going to get a lot of touches on the ground because Jacksonville cannot stop a soul on the ground. I think both these running backs could be very successful if, in fact, this bye week was a big difference maker for them and can get back Brian Bulaga, their right tackle, and Try Turner, their right guard. This could be a really big, difference maker going forward in terms of the running game because the fact that you haven't had your 2 starting right offensive linemen is a pretty big difference. So hopefully you get those guys back. You're able to impose your will, run the ball. And Josh Kelley with a couple touches here and there, 10 plus, could be of value. Phillip Lindsay, again, if Phillip Lindsay was more of a receiving back in this offense and he was given more consistent opportunities as a pass catcher, I'd have more confidence playing him. But considering he does not catch the ball very often out of the backfield for this team, it just leads me to believe that unless he scores a touchdown or has a big run, that breaks out, it's probably not going to be some consistent numbers that we're going to see from him. So as of right now, I'm a little bit hesitant on Phillip Lindsay, but I'm okay starting him as a top 30 back because I still think that against Kansas City, he's going to be a pretty big part of it in order to keep the ball away from, Patrick Mahomes and keep them off the field. So hopefully Phillip Lindsay, this offense, they get it moving on the ground and can get some value there. Moving on, we have 31, Latavius Murray. Again, of course, Alvin Kamara being the number 1 running back does, affect Latavius Murray's value because against Carolina, it is a difficult matchup. But let's not forget, Latavius Murray this season is averaging 10 rushing attempts per game. These are opportunities that we cannot pass up on. You play against one of the softer run-stopping defenses. I think Latavius Murray, just a couple weeks back, was vulturing touchdowns. Could once again happen this upcoming week, make a pretty big difference here. JaMycal Hasty, we talked about him. If, in fact, Raheem Mostert is going to be out and on the IR, there's going to have to be another running back that accompanies Jerrick McKinnon in his backfield and gives him a little bit of a breather here and there. JaMycal Hasty, this past week, 9 total rushing attempts for 37 rushing yards. Okay, 4 yards per carry average. Isn't the worst thing, isn't the best thing, but the opportunity is there. And I think as long as he's going to get some touches here and there, he could have himself an opportunity to break out a run. As long as Jeff Wilson Jr. is not involved and it's him and Jerrick McKinnon, I think both these guys could be of value going forward in this 49ers offense. Le'Veon Bell is the next option. So here's the thing. Like I was mentioning, he'll get touches on the ground. That is not a uncertainty in my eyes. I think where he finds his most value is a pass catching back, maybe even lining up out wide as a slot receiver. Again, with Sammy Watkins out for the next couple of weeks, it looked like Byron Pringle was getting more receptions than DeMarcus Robinson and Mecole Hardman. So as of right now, it seems like they need Le'Veon Bell to come in as a receiving option for this team. And if in fact he's able to and ready to go this upcoming week, knows the offense, it could be of pretty decent value. We have ourselves D'Ernest Johnson at number 34. Again, if you're going to play against the Cincinnati Bengals, and the last time we saw Cleveland impose their will, you had 2 20-point running backs, both of them almost getting over 100 yards. It just seems like an automatic play to get D'Ernest Johnson a little bit more utilization this upcoming week in comparison to the past 2 weeks. Of course, they've had tougher matchups in the past 2 weeks against Indianapolis and Pittsburgh. Again, Cincinnati should be a cakewalk for them, and I think there's always an opportunity that if D'Ernest Johnson gets himself 10 to 15 touches on the ground because they're up early, he could make a lot of plays with those opportunities. Devonta Freeman is my number 35. Playing against the Philadelphia Eagles, On the ground, it's not a dream of a matchup. You don't want to do that. But Devonta Freeman will be the goal line back. If, in fact, they're able to move the ball, get down there, he'll get the opportunity. Otherwise, he's a receiving back. He can catch the ball easily 6-7 times in a singular game against the defense as such, like the Philadelphia Eagles, and find value. So, again, I'm not going to ignore the fact that Devonta Freeman has value. This offense for the New York Giants has not been playing well. Daniel Jones was the leading rusher for this past week. But, again, the opportunities for Devonta Freeman, 18 rushing attempts is great. 2 targets through the air. 20 total opportunities. That's all we ask for a running back as such. So we're going to continue to ride him. The last running back I wanted to mention was Chase Edmonds. Even though I think Chase Edmonds disappeared purely because of the game script. When you're up, 20 plus points against the Dallas Cowboys, you don't need to bring in your third down running back. You don't need to have him come in and get touches in terms of receptions, because in the last couple of weeks, he's been 5+ receptions. Those are numbers you would love to see, but especially when it's not a shootout, you don't have to utilize him. Playing against Seattle could be a shootout, could have to see a little bit more of Chase Edmonds, so that's why we go ahead and throw his name out there as a receiving back. Those are my top 36 running back rankings for the 2020 fantasy football season for week 7. So thank you everybody for watching. I appreciate it. Make sure you click the like button down below. Tomorrow, Wide Receiver Wednesday, we'll talk about wide receivers, all that kind of jazz. Keeping up with it. Make sure you put in some waivers. I appreciate you guys spending your time here today. Until tomorrow, I'll see you guys. Thank you very much. Peace.